Hello, everyone, and welcome to the WF Spotlight, the Women's Football Spotlight podcast. Me, Dan Conway, and my co-host Ross Ballock. And today it's been a couple of weeks, but we're going to try and recoup and go back a few weeks and touch on England's victory and loss to Belgium. And we'll talk on some of the latest WSL talking points, Champions League talking points, and a few things in between, Women's World Sevens, and plenty more. So, Ross, let's get straight into it. Shall we go back in time? Shall we go back and get in our DeLorean, go back a couple of weeks and mention England, touch on England first? So England. Let's start with the win because that was first, and then lost 3-2 just a few days later. So let's start with the win. Anything you want to pick from that victory that you liked? Any positives or
It all,
negatives?
the weekend all started so well, didn't it? And
Yeah,
then it didn't end so well. Um, yeah, obviously the performance on the Friday night was really good. But obviously they've played well. Some things that stood out to me was Hannah Hampton starting again over
really interesting
Earps.
point. Two, yeah,
Um,
both games.
um, Played really well. Belgium aren't a great team. But obviously they proved me wrong a few days later with their win. But for me, I think the interesting point was Hannah Hampton starting both games. It seems we spoke about that during the last international break. We said that Serena Vingan probably needed to make a decision, and it didn't necessarily need to be her coming out and saying who was her number one goalkeeper, but just swapping the goalkeepers every game for the run into the tournament. I just felt it probably wasn't ideal. So to see Hampton start both games back to back, I think that was quite telling in where Wiegemann's thinking for the tournament. But also, I don't know about you, but like you'd probably say penny for the thoughts of Mary Earps, maybe.
Well, yeah, I think this is Serena Wiegman. I think you're right. Serena Wiegman doesn't seem like she's going to come out and vocally say Hampton's my choice because obviously injury can happen, anything. But the
Yeah.
fact she started twice, two Nations League games running, it clearly she's shown her cards. Uh, Hannah Hampton is obviously, I think, at this point, it's England's number one for the tournament coming. I assume she really likes her distribution with her feet. She's good with it. But you're right with Mary Earps. I I also think that maybe Wiegman is also partly afraid to come out and say it because Mary Earps is such a popular figure in women's football, particularly in English. The WSL. I know she's at PSG, but she's still a huge, popular, iconic player for England. So I think Serena Wiegman would definitely be afraid for the backlash if she were to come out and say Mary Earps isn't going to be my number one. Obviously, that said, anything can happen, but I think that was a statement by playing those two games. Mary Earps, I feel for her because she's an incredible goalkeeper. I think had it not been that Hannah Hampton's great with her feet, I think Mary Earps is a better shot stopper, a better keeper in every other department.
Yeah. I don't think necessarily there's any fear in making that announcement. I think it's just timing. Obviously, it's mid-April. The game was played at the beginning of the month. Still plenty that could happen between now and the end of the season and the tournament starting. And whatever happens, you'd say three goalkeepers are going to the tournament. So you're going to need all three goalkeepers on side. I don't think Mary Earps would spit spit a dummy out or throw the toys out the pram. I think she'll still see it as an opportunity between now and the end of the season to change minds. And I think that there's still a place for her, particularly in knockout football. I think we've all seen what a great record she has, particularly in penalty shootouts, and that experience as well. For me, I guess I've got a question for you. My question for you would be, do you think there's any worry in the fact that Hampton doesn't necessarily start every week for her club team?
She seems to be starting most games, doesn't she? It seems to me that she's starting most league games. It's cup games, I think occasionally she's been kind of swapped out, which I guess is fairly common They like to give the rotator keepers for like give their kind of their B goalkeeper a run out in cup games. But I think she's Chelsea's number one. I think she's fairly solid, and no, I'm not concerned because I said she is definitely Chelsea's number one in my opinion.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I
but
guess
go
for
on.
the return, I think for the return game, I don't know if we wanted to go there straight away, but for the return game, it's really difficult to remember that England were hit by injuries. Obviously, Lauren James had to drop out the squad. That's a huge loss. I think her England performances this calendar year, particularly, they've really come on to another level. And I've been really impressed with her consistency at international level,
Yeah.
particularly as she has missed so much, or not so much, but she has missed parts of the WSL season with injury. I think they also lose Mead as well.
Yeah, she was for the right for the second game.
Yeah, so
You could tell.
that's pretty huge. They're two big absences, but I guess for me, in a tournament year, um, I did wonder if maybe going away some changes could be made, especially with such a quick turnaround. Played at Wembley, which is a huge pitch on Friday night, and then we're expected to play away in Belgium. I know the travel's not massive, it's not a great amount of fatigue in the legs in terms of travel to Belgium from England, but I guess I was maybe thinking that there'd be a few more changes than there were.
What I thought was interesting on the second game, like the Belgian game, it was like England hadn't turned up. It was a completely different team. Now there were a few changes, like Nikita Paris, started up front, which initially I was quite pleased to see, but I was also surprised. And Aggie Beaver-Jones, in fairness to her, she was a positive from the 2 days. She scored, she looked good, and she's got pace. So I think she looks like she's going to be. uh, We've been using on the left and the right, and so it's good that she can play either way. And I think she'll potentially be Russo's understudy. It looks like, but
Yeah.
also can play on the left or right if they want to kind of bring in someone. I thought there was a point where it was Beaver Jones, Russo, and Mead, and the three of them looked awesome. But the second game against Belgium, when they lost 3-2, there wasn't a lot to say really. I think that the defence was woeful that night. Millie Bright, if I remember right, Millie Bright and Neve Charles were pulled off at half time, and I think that's quite telling. That for a manager to do at half time is quite a chop and a change. But Neve Charles was struggling against on they were getting joy down that flank where Neve Charles was, and I've always been a big fan of Neve Charles, but uh, they were the pace that they were putting in the Belgium forward. They had I think Villa, who came back, who was really good, scored 2 goals, looked really strong, and she's just you could tell she was a world class finisher. And Neve Charles was struggling all game, and so when they took off, they brought on Jess Carter, who shored up. Definitely isn't as great attacking going forward as Neve Charles, but she was solid. Do you know what I mean she wouldn't venture forward? She was a bit more reserved, stayed back, and steadied defence, which England needed. But lots of learning points. Nikita Paris wasn't the focal point, and she's never going to be a Russo. But it just reminds us how good Russo has become. With her link-up play, being a focal point. Uh, yeah, we've got to keep Russo fit and safe for the summer, because it was quite telling.
Well, I think the one positive to come out of the game was Agyemang
Yeah,
um, making her debut, being called up, I think, from the under 21s as well. But I remember seeing her play at one of the youth tournaments a couple of years ago during the summer, and I was with someone watching the game, and they said to me like, "Is is she good because she's good, or is she good because you know her athleticism, her physicality was clearly beyond the age group that she was playing in?" And that's always tricky. Like when you watch those youth tournaments, obviously, like young players will develop at different times. That's just
yeah.
how that goes. But I think what she showed in that game was it was refreshing to see a young player come on and just not be phased at
No.
all. It was almost as if she'd watched the game from the bench and was like, "Get me on, I'll have a bit of this.
Well,
Like, get me
she
on
scored
there."
a cracking goal. I mean,
Yeah,
and I suppose the question now will be: it's great that you did it as a one-off, real opportunity, and she grabbed it with both hands. But now, will she be in the full squad? The first team squad? No, I don't think so on a consistent basis. You never know. I'd love her to
yeah,
prove us wrong, but I think she'll stay in the under 21s, play more games there. But what I'd like to see her now is she at Brighton rather than be. She's played quite a lot of sub appearances because she's so young. I think she's something like 19. So I think now it's a case of can she realistically next season come in, start more regularly, and score more regularly because she shows talent and promise. Like I said, she's a real unit. She's got pace and she's solid. You mean she's got a bit of height on her as well. But now, can you do it on a consistent basis? And the Brighton first team, can you break in and push Frank Kirby aside? That's what she's up against.
yeah. I mean, obviously, it's a tough one because I don't think you can look to Brighton and say, "Can you develop this player, please?" Because obviously she's on loan to them. It's not really their responsibility to do that. And obviously for Brighton, they're in position in that kind of like that middle third of the table where they're trying to finish as high as they can, and it's not necessarily about doing favors for particularly for other teams. Um, but yeah, we've spoken a lot about like the depth at that in that number 9 position. I don't think Paris plays the best football out there. I don't think Frank Kirby is the answer to 9 or 10. Um, I understand Wiegman talking up her experience as a player, but I think the game has moved on a level since her peak, since Kirby's peak, and obviously we've spoken a lot about how Beth England doesn't seem to be in the thinking. And so for me, it was just nice to see a young player come on. And like I said, for me, the attitude more than anything, just not being phased at
Great.
all. But obviously, with the worry we had about depth in that central striking position, it's nice to know that there potentially is an option there that they can take. And I think the good thing, what reminds me a lot of is she reminds me a lot of Russo in 21 when they won it. You know, you had Russo, Kelly, Toon, 60 minutes pretty much every game
Yeah.
came on, but they knew their role. They knew their role to come off the bench. And I don't think any of the three of them have ever come out or said, I should have been starting ahead of this person, or, can't believe I was just on the bench. And, you want to do more than make sub appearances, obviously. But I think maybe there's something there in the sense of for Agyemang, it's a similar thing. She will be quite happy to be that super sub, the impact player, the finisher for those last 30 minutes, knowing that Russo is going to start every game. But it just, for me, it's the closest thing I've seen to Russo for outside of Beth England in terms of all round striker play. And yes, it was only, 15, 20 minutes, but like I said, for a position where I didn't feel England were particularly strong in terms of depth, maybe it could be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. She was the only positive that came from the second Belgium game where they lost. But let's hope they're definitely one to watch. Let's see how she develops next season. Right, Ross, let's talk about Champions League. It's been a disappointing week for
We have
English
to.
teams. Chelsea lost 4-1 to Barcelona. Um, yeah, disappointing scoreline. What did you expect? Did you expect 4-1? Where were you thinking?
No, I think for me, that was the biggest surprise. It wasn't necessarily the loss. I felt that Barcelona probably would have enough to win their home leg, but I didn't expect it to be by 4-1. And I genuinely thought like both ties would be decided in the second leg. And I think probably Chelsea have now left themselves a bit too much to do. Um,
Quite a mountain, isn't it?
yeah,
I thought Sonia Bonpastor, I don't know, I thought with her experience and success at Lyon, I didn't see that a 4-1 loss. I didn't expect it to be that much like yourself.
yeah, it's just that Barcelona team. They're an absolute machine. They're and for all the experience that Bombastador has, we d- it, it's difficult, but we need to keep in mind that this is her first season at
Yeah.
Chelsea. You know, she's had two transfer windows. I would probably guess that the summer transfer window wasn't necessarily all of her choices because, you know, as we know, football clubs plan transfer windows quite far in advance. Yeah, like I said, that Barcelona team is just a real well drilled, well oiled machine. A lot of those players have played together for a while or have come through the system. And so beating Chelsea wasn't a surprise. I'm just more shocked that it's, to me, I don't see a way back for Chelsea. I think it could be a really exciting second leg, but I think to keep a clean sheet and score 4 goals against Barcelona, if anybody can do it, it's Chelsea. But you know, they they've made it really difficult for themselves. And actually, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We talk about competitivity in the league and competition, but it's really difficult to win 4 trophies in a season. It's just difficult to do that. So whether it's men's football or women's football, we've seen that in the last few years with men's teams. It's a tough thing to do to go and win that amount of games that you need to do to win 4 trophies. Um, and so, yeah, it's just, I think they've probably left themselves too much to do.
I think as well, it's interesting because Barcelona missed a penalty in the first half, and in fairness, it could have been a lot worse. If that penalty had gone in effectively, it could
Yeah.
have been worse. But you're right, Barcelona were a machine, and they just, the forwards, the Chelsea defence couldn't handle the forwards over 90 minutes. There were times where the Chelsea defenders did well, but on overall that score, sometimes you watch a game, you think, oh, 4-1, that was harsh. It doesn't reflect the game. But in
Yeah.
fairness, Barcelona, they took the chances, and the, the Chelsea defence, you can see what they've taken on. They've bought Germa, and you can just see if they want to compete at that next level, that defence, one or two of that defence there might be some changes.
Yeah, she could be real key, but this is the risk when you buy a player who is in their off season and is carrying an injury, and you ask them to jump in to these high level competitions at the back end of the season, where players are in rhythm, they're fit, and they are playing with players who they've spent the last 6 months working with, but
Yeah,
also like it's just that idea of, you get to the business end. It's called the business end of the season for a reason. That's where you got to take care of business, and unfortunately, you've got to take care of business against the best teams. Um, and that's not a knock on her at all, but obviously Gurma's not been able really to contribute to anything yet. And again, I think I think for her, that's gonna we're not gonna see the best of her until next season. We're not gonna see it, and fans just kind of need to be okay with that. Um, but yeah, I think next season she could make a big difference. Obviously, you feel for Chelsea because they were on for something really special, but there's a reason why it's special. It's because people don't do it very often. It's because it's a really hard thing to do. So for me, unfortunately I think they've left themselves too much to do. Even with Barcelona coming to Stamford Bridge, I don't see them scoring enough goals to win the tie and keep a clean sheet. I just think that Barcelona team's too good for anybody at the
yeah,
moment.
you can't see. Barcelona losing by more than 3 goals because that's what's gonna have to be. You're right.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Arsenal. So not as disappointing, more hope, but Arsenal at home and at the Emirates lost 2-1 to Lyon. Did you expect that result? Is that, or what were you expecting?
No, I don't think I had share the positivity that you shared, or a bit more hope, in the sense that there's only a one goal in it. Yeah, there's more hope, but actually, I think Arsenal should be really disappointed.
Yeah,
Players came out after the game, said all the right things that they could turn it round, and I think they can, because I don't think I don't think Lyon are necessarily better than them. But to do that in front of you when you've got the home advantage, I think you've just got to be really disappointed. I don't know if you agree with me or
yeah,
not.
no, you've nailed it. To be fair, like if you're gonna take an advantage, you've got to do it at your home ground. When they had all those fans, that 12th person, that 12th fan, that's what you got to take advantage of. It gives, yes, there's only 1 goal deficit, but they've got to go to Lyon, and I think the tricky thing was with that game is that Lyon were clinical. They didn't have tons of chances, but Arsenal never. Those days when they never looked like they were going to score. They just looked toothless. They weren't really creating enough clinical opportunities. So they got a goal through the penalty, but other than that, they never seemed like they were going to score. Where Lyon were clinical, and credit to, I think it was Diani and Dumine. They they were both a threat, and they gave Arsenal a torrid time, their defence. And if Arsenal are going to come back, they're going to have to contain them two forwards because they made it extremely difficult for Arsenal to kind of.
Yeah.
You could see the difference. We're talking about Champions League winning teams, Lyon and Barcelona. You could just see. I agree. I think Arsenal aren't necessarily any worse than them, but the experience they've got in the Champions League, you could tell. But yeah, Arsenal have to have an on day. They can't. They need to be clinical when they've got the chances because really they had chances and just didn't really. They didn't really create enough. So
Yeah, which I think you've got to ask questions when the team that has scored the most goals in the WSL this season look so toothless, and
yeah,
not for the first time this season. Um, the FA Cup game at home to Liverpool. Obviously, Liverpool play with a very low block, very compact, playing on the break, but they didn't create loads of chances. I think I made the same comment about the game in Madrid, and we could talk about the weather and the pitch and whatever, but they had opportunity to score and just weren't clinical. Um, it, you wonder, is this a mental block? Or is this actually a problem in the league where it seems so much easier for them to score against WSL defenses? And yes, you expect the Champions League to be a step up, but like I said, like you said, they looked like they could have played all night and not scored. And I think as an Arsenal fan, you have to worry that now you've got to go away to Lyon again, like you said, with a team that's got a lot of experience being successful and winning things and getting over the line. And, for 3 games in recent past, Arsenal have been so poor in an attacking sense in terms of either creating chances or finishing those chances. It's going to be a tight one. I still think they have a chance.
yeah,
I think they probably need to get the first goal. I think if they go 3-1 down, I think that could be too much mentally, emotionally. So if they can get the first goal, I don't think it even needs to be early. If they get the first goal in the 80th minute, there's still extra time and penalties to go. So I think they need to get the first goal. But I still think they have a chance. The Barca Chelsea, I think I would say that's 75% in favour of Barcelona. But I think the Lyon Arsenal, I would go 60-40 on that. I think Arsenal still have a chance.
yeah. I agree. I think you've summarised and predicted them right. I agree with that. Okay, let's move on to some of the news talking points. So let's revisit Women's World Sevens. So let me just kind of mention a couple of things and I'll get your thoughts. So Manchester United will be one of 8 clubs competing in the Women's World Seven tournament in May. So a couple of questions. So when I looked at the list, and you would have seen the same, I was surprised. There weren't really any big hitters. So there was no Chelsea, was it? No Lyon, no Barcelona. So the biggest team in there was you got Bayern Munich, Ajax, Man United. It was surprised. What did you think of the list of teams, and were you surprised that none of the big guns are included?
Well, I think the organisers will say they've announced only half the teams. There's still
True.
a chance that those teams come in. I think where you've got the problem is I've been led to believe that no NWSL teams are going to be
Yes, well, let
involved.
me mention that. So the American National Women's Soccer League does not finish until the 22nd of November, meaning any clubs wishing to participate in May would do so during the season. So then they mentioned near the BBC mentioned that they're possibly looking at running a second tournament for the NWSL later in the. It's mad.
It is mad. Um, I don't, I just don't. Like I said, I've said before, I don't have a problem with the concept of the tournament. I'm all for trying new things.
Yeah.
The women's football need to look at themselves like a tech startup in business, really, and you've got to think differently and maybe use some disruptor like behavior and do things a bit differently to make a scene and not be afraid for things to fail. I think where this tournament fails is not in its inception or the concept. For me, it's just timing. I think it's really, really bad timing. Um, Obviously, United have confirmed they're going to be one of the 8 teams, only 4 announced so far. So there's still time for Chelsea,
Yeah.
Lyon, Barcelona, Arsenal to get involved. There's still time for, but with the Euros coming, it's the timing. And then the back end of the calendar year to get the NWSL clubs involved, well, that's right in the middle of the European season. So how does that work? So I
Couple of
just,
questions.
I don't get it.
There's
I just, the
more
timing.
questions than answers. So let me
Yeah.
mention a few other points. So the winner will receive 1.2 billion. So massive, like kind of budget for a team. That's a huge. That provides.
20%
Yeah,
of a top end budget. Yeah.
or most for a smaller club. Now, obviously, I don't think there's going to be any small clubs going, but we'll see. So they'll play 15-minute halves with extra time deciding tiebreakers. Up to 25 players. The squads can have up to 25 players, but only 14 can take part in the game. So I think it's going to be something like quite rolling subs. So I do think the 15-minute halves, short games, it does sound like quite a fun concept. 7 aside. It
Yeah.
sounds like it could be actually quite fun to watch. Like you said, a bit more relaxed. 7 aside. But you're right. My fear is that our players going to be like Man United. They've got a lot of their team are international players. Are a lot of them going to be going like half-hearted because they want to get injured for the tournament coming up? Do you know what I mean? The Euros.
Yeah. I mean, and this is the problem. Like, again, we've talked about in the WSL, what the league lacks is a real competitive balance. And again, just the timing for me, like the only saving grace is there's 8 teams in the tournament, it's 15-minute halves. My guess is then it's probably not going to go on for more than 3 or 4 days, I believe. I don't
Right.
know. I think, well, there's some
Be like
dates.
Masters. I can't remember off the
I
head,
think
but
there were. I think there was dates between the 21st and the 23rd. So it's 3 days. So that's its saving grace in terms of timing. Well, the players only need to do 3 days of work. Like you said, it's 25 players in the squad, 14 per game. So you can change the entire team. My guess is there probably will be an element maybe of rolling substitutes. Again,
we'll
no
see.
one said anything, so we don't know. I, like I said, I don't have a problem with the concept. I'm all for trying new things. For me, just the timing doesn't work. The fact that it's only 3 days will probably ease minds of international
Yeah.
managers. But I think at the moment, Serena Vegan would be quite happy in the sense of, well, as it stands, only one English club's taking part. So
Could have been a
there's,
lot worse.
what, 4 players would, I would guess that. Georgia Stanway probably isn't going to be rushing back for that unless it's a way of her just building up some minutes. That could be a positive thing to come out of it with Bayern involved. Yeah, I think you can't judge it. But if you're having to run two of these tournaments in the same essentially calendar year to make sure you get all your best teams involved, then you've got to say to yourself, maybe the organisation on this one wasn't the best, but they've got good people in charge of the tournament. People who have been in the women's game and have been in and out around football for a long time, including Chelsea's former chief exec, I think he
Okay.
was, during Emma Hayes' time. So you just got to wait and see. Like I said, for me, it's just the timing's not great, but the saving grace there is that it is only 3 days.
I
And
think
until we see who the other teams are, it's going to be really hard to judge what effect it's really going to have. You've got Benfica, United, Munich, and Ajax so far. None of whom are in latter stages of European competition for the women's
they're all
game
similar to Man
anyway.
United
So
kind of teams, so it'd be interesting. I guess it might be that they were the B list, and we'll see what the A list gets announced, or
yeah,
we could be wrong. Maybe it's not. But I think it will be fun, like I said, because it's going to be effectively 30-minute games, 15, in less than an hour, a game will be completed. So I can see they're trying to do a quick format, and I guess they're trying to jump up a bit. It's the objective is clearly it's commercial. Weeks before the
content.
tournament starts, it's going to be, yeah, it's going to be trying to drum up extra eyes onto the Euros tournament in the summer.
Yeah,
So
it's 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 Instagram, TikTok
yeah,
clickbait, isn't it? It's
content
going to be
worthy.
short clips. A lot of content will come out of it. A lot of that content they'll probably give away to broadcasters, but at the same time, you've got the men's game going into the summer this year with the Club World Cup Championships. You've
Yeah,
got a major tournament in the women's game. There's a lot going on. It's a crowded calendar. I just wonder if they would be better off maybe waiting or organising something a bit more official and having some agreements with some FAs to really make a go of this, because you only have one opportunity to make a good first impression. And if this doesn't work, I don't know where they go from there.
could be
You
damaging.
second launch necessarily. So, I think it's going to be interesting to say the least. And I'm not going to badmouth it till I see how it works. It might not
No,
work, and we
yeah,
we
we
will
might
never
love
hear
it.
of it again. But it might be amazing.
We shall see. The jury's out. Okay, a couple of other talking points. Let's go Eni Aluko. So Eni Aluko was quite outspoken. Obviously, she's quite an outspoken character in general. So the former England striker says that Ian Wright and other male broadcasters and presenters risk blocking female pundits getting opportunities. She said, I've worked with Ian a long time, and I think he's a brilliant broadcaster, but I think he's aware of just how much he's doing in the women's game, and I think he should be aware of that. The fact of the matter is, there is a limited amount of spaces available. If we had a situation where there was an equal opportunity in the men's game for broadcasters and coaches that there is in the women's game, it's a free for all. But that's not the case. I can't dominate the men's game in that way, in the way that Ian does. Thoughts? Because I thought it was quite a controversial statement, and obviously she's not the first time she said controversial things. She's been in the tabloids, numerous times over the last year or two. Do you think she's correct? Do you think there should be less men in the women's game as we sit here, two blokes talking about women's football? Uh, any thoughts?
I
Genuinely
th-
honest.
I don't want to be mean about people, and I don't want to be negative about people. I think I think people in charge of the women's game, I think they'll say all good publicity is good publicity. Like, obviously, there are some things they don't want, maybe there are people out there that don't want to see the two of us talking about this, but it's something that we are interested in, and so we talk about it. If people want to listen to us, they can. If they don't want to, they don't have to. I'm not here to make money. I just like I'm interested in the women's game, and I like talking about it, and I like talking about it with you. Um,
It's a hard
I,
one, isn't it? I think.
it's really tough because it's a space that you and I are not involved in, and probably never will be. I don't think anyone's going to see this and go, "We need to get these two on ITV." Quick
Yeah,
shut.
it's
It ain't going to
Kings.
happen, right? So it's really nothing to do with me. I think the issue is sometimes as human beings we can often um look for excuses and often maybe not necessarily look in the mirror as hard as possibly we could or we should. Obviously, this interview stemmed off the back of an interview she did about a court case she's involved
Yeah,
with
Joey
someone
Barton.
else who I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of my time thinking about or talking about, um, for his own flaws
Yeah,
as well, unfortunately. But um, no, I don't agree with her. And actually, she says she's got, you know, year like 11 years, I think she said, of broadcasting experiences, and in the last 10 years, she's never got fewer work than she has now. Well, I, I don't hear her saying that there's things that she knows she needs to work on or improve on in her broadcasting capabilities. Like
yeah,
maybe before you start blaming it on other people or making excuses, maybe look a bit closer to home. I don't think she's not a pundit that I take a great deal of notice of. Not for any other reason other than it's just doesn't strike anything with me. I
yeah.
think the real shame is for somebody like Ian Wright, who has given so much to women's football, including today a story coming out about a player up at Stoke City in the third tier of women's football, picked up an ACL injury, was having issues doing her day job because she is not a professional footballer. She's a part-time footballer. And Ian Wright has paid for her operation and her rehab,
It's
and
amazing.
that's not something that he's come out and told anybody. That's something the player has come out and talked about off the back of this. He's somebody who has always championed the women's game for a long time and has always been a big supporter of Arsenal women. And we spoke about him a couple of weeks ago with his dislike of some of the ideas that were coming out in terms of the WSL. And I don't necessarily agree with those. But one thing nobody can disagree with is his passion for the women's game and the support that he's given it, including with his podcast with Steph Horton
Yeah.
that's out on a weekly basis as well. So unfortunately, I don't think she's right. I think possibly she needs to look a bit closer to home, and I'm not sure that Ian Wright was really the person to pick on. And actually, in fairness to Ian Wright, I rarely see him on the Saturday evening game at Sky, the
No,
WSL game.
he doesn't do much punditry.
I rarely see him doing WSL games. It's the international games, and I think there are still spaces for people to get work. I mean, I'm a big advocate of the WSL being allowed to be shown on TV at 3 p.m. on a Saturday
Yeah,
during TV blackout. I don't understand why that isn't a slot that could be utilised for women's football to push the game, and then you'd have at least one or two additional live games on TV. But I also do think, for me, that there are better female pundits out there working in both the men's and the women's game, and I don't think it was necessarily. Um, I don't think it's necessarily Eni Aluko's brightest moment to pick on someone who has supported her profession and her game for such a long period of time and in such a public way.
no, I agree. I think you've nailed it mostly. I think you've nailed it all. Like, uh, there are. Like, I agree. Like, Eni Aluko was a fantastic player for England. You know, she's a great player, but I'm not a big fan of her as a pundit, and it's nothing to do with, like I said, with her being a woman. It's just not a fan of her as a pundit. I think she lost a lot of clout, about 18 months ago when she said those things about being a football director, which we're not going to now and drag back up. But it it made her look naive. And I think if you look at the correlation, it would probably stem from that. It was quite, some people would say it was embarrassing. I think what she said wasn't correct, was very naive, and it made her look amateurish. And I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm sure the correlation is probably since what she said on air at that point, that she's probably had less work. So I think there are, like I said, they're better pundits and they're getting more airtime. You can't be great at everything, and not everyone can have every opportunity.
And also, in addition to that, every year footballers retire.
Yeah.
There are people who then come in
Fresh.
to the game, to the industry, and you see it with men's football. I'm seeing it more and more where maybe people are starting to look at players who have maybe been detached from the game a bit longer than others and starting to maybe question their place
Lose their
in that
edge.
media space. But yeah, I just, particularly in women's football, where standardized professionalization in the top league hasn't really been a thing for more than maybe 3 or 4 seasons. You're gonna have women coming out of the game who are recently out of the game, still attached to it, still have great contacts, still have an insight into how things work on a day-to-day basis, but who have also got media degrees or, television degrees. Like a lot of players will now look at those things because they had that time back in the day before they were professional, where maybe there was a second job or an opportunity to be a student, and they have trained in these things. Eni Aluko herself is, I think, a solicitor, a lawyer by
Wow.
trade. She could have easily gone into sports agency or, just back into the legal, but she practiced herself, but she wanted to stay within the game, which is great. But if you're not that good at it, the TV companies will know when people are tuning in or turning off. And if they're turning off, they will look for other people. And that's the way it works. And I think that's the way we want it to work. We don't want people getting special treatment. You want the best person for the job. And like I said, I think it's really unfair to pick on Ian Wright because I don't see him doing WSL games very often. Yeah,
He
he's
doesn't.
there for the England international games, but generally the WSL, so for her to say that he's dominating, I'm not quite sure what he's talking about there, other than maybe she looks at it and goes, well, that's the best paid part of the job when you do the international football, or that's when you get the most viewers as international football. I want to be there at the top. Well, to be at the top, perhaps you need to be the best at what you do. Yeah, I think only you can decide if you are the best. As far as I know, I'm not the best at this. Like I said, people could take it or leave it, but it's something we enjoy doing, and we're not very good at doing it consistently, but we enjoy doing it.
Yes. I think well summarised. Okay, Vivian Miedema. Man City forward Vivian Miedema has criticised the women's football schedule and called for those in charge of the calendar to make changes prioritising players' physical and mental safety. I will say this over and over again to the people in charge of the football calendar. It is time to realise the current schedule will need to change for players' physical and mental safety. So Vivian Miedema's Man City have been immersed in a busy schedule of late, playing 8 matches in 29 days throughout March as they competed in 4 competitions. So quite a bold statement from Miedema, and we're big fans of Miedema. Do you think she's right? Do you think, or do you think maybe not?
Well, she doesn't. My issue is you come out and say the schedule needs to change. My next question is then, okay, what changes need to be made? Because I hear players saying that they would like to play more. I hear some players saying they'd like to play less or fewer matches, that they want bigger gaps between games, which isn't always possible when you're trying to balance domestic and European competition. And when international competition in the women's game is probably king, the FA will make a lot more money from the Lionesses than maybe some of the WSL clubs will do with their fans throughout the season, it's a really tricky one. There is too much football, full stop.
Yeah.
You know, this, like, we've already touched on it. The Sevens tournament, Women's Euros, World Club Championships, pre-season friendlies abroad for the men's team. Yeah, there's too much football, but I don't know what those changes are. I personally would like to see a bigger WSL league,
Yeah, and
but
that's
that
going to
will
mean
only work. That will only work when there's competitive balance and more investment. And for that to happen, maybe we do need to do something like not have relegation for 5 or 6 seasons. But people didn't seem to like that either. And this is the problem you've got. Everybody wants something different, and I'm not entirely sure what that is at the moment. I have my ideas of what that could be, but I think for Miedema, I think she's just coming off. I wonder if maybe there's just a bit of frustration in the
yeah,
sense of she's had this horrible injury, the ACL injury that kept her out for a year, like a really long time. That was simultaneous with Beth Mead. They made a documentary about it that was on Amazon Prime, and it was really interesting insight, obviously because of their personal relationship as well. But they both missed a lot of football with serious injuries. There is a there does seem to be a lack of research and medical research I'm talking about now in terms of injuries for professional women's footballers.
yeah,
And there's lots of different reasons for that. But I think for Miedema, I wonder if it's frustration of serious injury, which led to maybe not her best season at Arsenal, which led to her not having a contract renewed by Arsenal, having to change team, and this season still picking up niggles here and there. And it's really difficult. I'm a big believer that if a player's out for a significant amount of time, it's probably going to take the same amount of time that they were out injured for them to get fully back. But when you have a serious injury like that, it can affect other parts of the body. And so, when you've had 12 months out, I don't think it's unusual for the next 12 months for there to be niggles and to pick up things here and there. Like, it's just the amount of times I don't know, the amount of times I seem to see female players or players in general pick up knee injuries, come back and do the opposite knee. Like, it's not unusual. The schedule probably does need to change, but I don't know. I don't know what changes she wants.
yeah,
And I personally, with my experience coaching in the men's game and following the men's game for as long as I have, I think there's a lot of players there who would say 8 matches in a month isn't actually that bad.
yeah. No, it's a fair point. And I think you're right. Like, I think it's more frustration because of the injuries she's had, the difficult ACL injuries. So I think that spilled over because, like I said, we recommend realistically the WSL needs to increase to at least 16 teams, and at the moment they only play 22 league games a season.
Yeah.
Where the men's play 38. Now, if they have to have 16, it's going to increase their games, somewhat. I can't remember. I think it will increase them to 30 games a season if I remember correctly. If they have 16 teams, so the games are going to increase, and then whilst you've got a player at Man City who, like, medium, rightly so, is at a top club, the players who are at the likes of Tottenham or Leicester, they're probably, like I said, they're probably saying the opposite. They'd rather have more than 22 league games. Yes, they might have cup games, but they're probably not going to get very far in the cups. So realistically, compared to Man City or Chelsea, who are going to have cup runs and Champions League, FA Cup, the smaller teams aren't going to have those runs. So I think she needs to be careful. Like I said, because 22 league games is a low amount of games, and that needs to increase. So I think it's probably frustration, uh, because I can't see anything other than games increasing in the coming years as it becomes
Yeah.
more commercial.
But I've heard players in the WSL say that like four days gap between games is ideal. But I don't know how you get that when, like I said, when you're tying in multiple competitions. Do you have a bigger league and sacrifice a League Cup, for example? Do you say, do you know what, we'll just have the Women's FA Cup, but we'll make the league bigger and we'll get more games played that way? But to have bigger leagues, you need to have more teams capable of playing at those levels. I think the other thing as well for Miedema, between the Dutch national team and Man City, I don't think there are going to be very many players who are getting better conditioning, physiotherapy support than she is.
No.
And that's not a knock, but like I said, I'd like if players want to talk about this, great, but give me some put some meat on the bones. I don't know whether that was missed out in the reports, and she did, you know, draw up her ideal calendar. It certainly wasn't in the news report, but like I said, you're hearing different things from, and it's tough. I'd love to see the women's calendar change. I think a big thing for broadcast is telling stories and having big gaps between the season during the season for long international breaks or what going into. I mean, I remember back in the day when they had like the Continental Cup, you'd play like the Conti Cup, and for the women's game, you'd have like 2 or 3 league games, and then you'd go into this group
Yeah.
competition style competition for the Continental Cup, and just the league would kind of be put to one side while these other competitions were played. And yeah, like for broadcast, they want a narrative, and this is where this is the genius of Premier League marketing is they've got that narrative. 38 games, anybody can beat anybody else. We'll see who comes out at the end of it. We don't necessarily have that in a lot of other leagues, men's or women's, around Europe and around the world at the moment. I don't know what those changes could be. I would like to see more games personally, but maybe there are players out there who think they're already at capacity. But if you're already at capacity, I don't see how investment increases, wages increases, support team levels increase if you can't make a case for it. And if you're not going to play more games, you can't necessarily make a case for it, or you can't necessarily attract that investment if
Mm.
a sponsor knows, well, I'm only get 22 games a season at this and I might get relegated after the first year. Like, why would I want to do a long-term partnership? Like, it's tricky. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know where it's come from. It seemed to have come from post-match and again that she picked up another niggle again, so it could be frustration. But yeah, I'd love to hear
Her solution.
other players' opinions about it. Yeah. If you want changes, what changes do you want to be? Like I said, I've heard players say they want 4 days rest between games. If you play Wednesday in the Champions League, you're then looking at Tuesday for your league game. But when do you get the next Champions League game in? And so it's tough. It's really tough. And you know, people look at being a professional footballer and they just look at the money. You get paid that much, particularly in the men's game, but you get paid that much to be a footballer, and they're moaning about it or whatever. And it's all well and good, but I've heard stories in the men's game where players have said, "Yeah, I do have a lot of money, but I've got no time to spend it because I'm constantly going."
Yeah.
Um, I could actually see maybe something in the future where players will go and specify an amount of games that they will play per season and maybe get paid on a pro rata basis. But yeah, I'd love to know what changes the players would want, particularly Miedema, as someone who has such an iconic status in the game as it stands right now. Has been there, done it, and done it at a high level for a number of years. I'm all for getting players' input and getting them in and around the table when it comes to organising competitions and structure and making big changes.
Yeah, I think you're right. If you're gonna condemn or criticize something, then you need to be able to provide a solution. Just, I think, to finish, then, last quick point. We're up to an hour. Aaron Sorensen's contract has been renewed till 2027 at Everton as the head coach. Sorensen told Everton he spoke to owners, the Friedkin Group, and both want stability and to create consistency at the club. Building a competitive squad is also Sorensen's main target for the summer transfer window. Following an injury-plagued season, he said, "It's not like financially we're going to close the gap to the top four, or I'll say five, six, seventh almost. with what some of the teams are spending. Any any thoughts on Sorenson's contract or what he said about closing the gap on the top four?
Is it all right for me to say as a Liverpool fan I don't care? No, no, with my coaching hat on, I think it's a good thing. I think
Yeah,
managers aren't necessarily given the time that they would like to build foundations, to build squads. I look at I really like the kind of the idea of like college sports in America, like particularly college basketball or college football. And they will look at coaches essentially in most instances on like 4 year cycles because most students will spend 4 years at college, right? So you look at it and you go, well, when he comes in and he recruits the freshmen or the first year university students, you then start looking at, well, how many of them are leaving after the second or third year to go pro? How many of them are coming through the whole 4 years? Are they winning anything as they go? And essentially, you're given like that 4 year cycle. Can this person prove they can build a winning team? So I think it's great. Like I said, with the coaching hat, and I think it's great that there's that stability there. Obviously, the men's team are moving to a brand new stadium this season, which will increase revenue for the club as a whole,
yeah,
which can only be a good thing for the women's team. There was talk of potentially looking at making Goodison Park the women's stadium.
yeah.
I don't know if that's something that they would maybe like Real Madrid share with like the under 21s from the men's academy or what, but you know they potentially they could be a WSL club with a 40,000 or 30,000 seat stadium, which would be incredible when you think about it. I think he's right. Financially, Everton are not going to catch up with the big hitters in
He's been
one
quite
in one
honest, hasn't he, in
foul
those
swoop.
comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult because the men's team are in a position where they need to improve. And unfortunately, if you're an established Premier League club like Everton, it's the men's team that is going to pay the way for everybody else, academy players, WSL teams, women's academy, whatever it may be. You know, football in the community, even like the community outreach programs, which Everton are incredible at within a city that needs that community outreach. Well, like most cities these days, they need their football clubs to step up. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. They've got a couple of young players out on loan in the championship this season, including Issy Hobson, who scored that incredible like goal against Arsenal last season, which came on at like 16 years old and scored that goal. I think she's been on loan out of
Yeah.
Sheffield United, I want to say this season. I
Okay.
could be wrong, but she is out on loan and getting game time. So there's that. But yeah, consistency. I think I don't know about you, but you, if you're a fan, you want to see a manager try and build something, and if you don't feel they've had that resources yet, with these new owners coming in as well, maybe with the frequent group American owners coming in, maybe the women's team will start getting a level of spending that they've not had before. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it,
I don't know
it
what
could
you
be like
think.
Burnley, where the Burnley owners came in and they've invested more in the women's team, the American owners, and I think the women's football is obviously it was a bigger thing in America, it's more popular, but obviously now
It
it's
still
getting
is.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's they've brought that understanding of college football with America, with women, and they're investing over here. So yeah, but I think he's a reasonable coach. I think he's the coach that they want to keep consistent. He's the right guy. He picks up good results when they're not expecting. Sometimes they'll lose when you don't expect them to, but they'll always be safe with Brian Thompson. So I think renewing his contract another 2 years, I think, is the right thing for them at this time for, like I said, stability and consistency. Okay, let's wrap that up. We're over an hour. It's been a good time, and thank you very much, Ross. And we'll see you all next time.
Cheers.